Haas. I'm the National Director of Programs at Pet Partners, and this is a Facebook Live that we call Volunteering with Your Pet. And this is a session that is mostly designed for our prospective volunteers because I'm going to spend some time talking about what therapy animal visitation looks like. I'm going to talk about requirements, steps to join Pet Partners. So like I said, lots of good information for prospective volunteers, but I do love having current volunteers watching too, especially if you're willing to engage in the comments and share your experiences and tips and tricks for those who might be interested in joining Pet Partners. So that's what today is all about. And I'm wondering if people could help me by letting me know where you're from, what kind of pet you have. That helps me know who I'm talking to and maybe what some of the interest level would be. All right, well, I'm going to keep going here. We can move to the next slide. There we go. Great. So I wanted to start. Oh, I see some people popping in. Okay. For a second there, I wasn't sure if we were live. So I see somebody's here from Fort Myers with a basset hound, somebody from Virginia with cats. Oh, somebody's got 5 fur babies. Hi, Marcy in Burbank. Somebody with a lab ski pup, which I believe is a lab husky mix, is my guess, from Orlando. Awesome. Okay. Thanks for bearing with me. Just wanted to make sure that we were live. I did want to start today's session or chat with just giving some information in general about what therapy animal volunteerism is and what it looks like, where it happens. And so I should say first that we have 10,000 therapy animal volunteer teams in the United States, a few outside of the US as well. Those 10,000 teams represent all 50 states. And when I say a team, I mean one handler plus one animal. So whenever you hear me say teams, that's what I'm referring to, not a group of people that work together, but one handler with their animal. You make up an awesome team. Those teams visit in a variety of different places. Up on your screen, you'll see some of the most common places where our therapy animal teams visit, but this list is not exhaustive. As you can imagine, with 10,000 teams, that also means there are thousands of facilities or entities where they spread that healing power of the human-animal bond. We can go to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about what therapy animal visits look like. In other words, what types of visits exist out there. Once again, this is not really an exhaustive list. The types of visits can be very diverse, but I wanted to give a sample. So first we have social visits. These are visits in which you are spreading a little bit of cheer. You are making somebody smile. You're reducing isolation. Social sounds fun and casual, and oftentimes our social visits are fun and casual, but they also can have a lot of impact for people who are experiencing maybe isolation or loneliness, whether that's short term, maybe they're in a rehab center or a hospital where they're not seeing their family or friends as often. Maybe it's in a nursing care facility where a resident doesn't have a lot of family or friends nearby. A visit from a therapy animal team can be a really important social highlight in their week or their month. We also have more formal visits that take place in a therapeutic setting, say with a physical therapist or an occupational therapist. In these cases, the therapist is, in charge of their patient, and they will partner with a therapy animal team, a volunteer, to help sort of execute the therapist plan. So as an example, there could be a physical therapist who is working with a patient who had surgery and now needs to kind of relearn or practice fine motor skills. They might have a Pet Partners team with them, and the person or the patient is petting the animal or brushing the animal as a way to kind of motivate towards some of those rehabilitation needs. We also have a lot of teams doing literacy-based visits or reading visits, which we call Read With Me. And these are situations in which people who are learning to read, typically children, will read to your animal. As you know, again, this could be a motivating factor, especially for children. Also, there is a real feeling of non-judgment when somebody who is learning to read has the opportunity to do that with an animal. Last one up on this list is something I call stress breaks. Obviously, social visits can also reduce stress, but there are also therapy animal visits that are really kind of centered around stress reduction. So this might look like Pet Partners teams going to a university campus during finals week, or perhaps when freshmen are moving in the fall and they're leaving their family for the first time. We also see stress reduction-based visits happening at airports a lot with traveler stress. One other thing to mention, it didn't get on the slide, but during the current situation with COVID, teams are visiting. In fact, we have more facilities than ever looking for teams, but oftentimes the visits are a little bit different than in a time where there isn't a pandemic. And so you'll see a lot of staff visits right now in healthcare facilities, meaning our teams will go and specifically provide their time to the staff. So hospital workers will all gather in a conference room. They'll have the opportunity to have kind of a mental health break, interacting with Pet Partners teams, because as you know, healthcare workers have been under a lot of stress for the last 18 months or so. So I did want to mention that staff-based visits are another one that we see a lot. We can go to the next slide. So really briefly, I wanted to touch on the fact that therapy animal visits don't always look like a human with their dog. We also register 8 other species. They're all listed up there. I'm actually going to scroll through the comments here and see if we have any non-canine owners. I did see we had a cat owner. Otherwise, mostly dogs, but we do really welcome and appreciate non-canines. They are equally able to spread that power of the human-animal bond. So if you know of anybody who owns some of these species, sometimes Pet Partners is the only place that they can register. So therapy animal visits are inclusive of all these species. We can go to the next slide. Ooh, I see somebody with horses. Okay, great. So I'm wrapping up sort of my introduction to what therapy animal visitation looks like, and then I'm going to move into kind of requirements and steps to actually begin volunteering. But I did want to touch on the commitment, because we often get asked, well, how much do I need to volunteer? Where exactly do I have to volunteer? And ultimately with Pet Partners, your volunteer journey is really your own. You are empowered to choose where you want to visit, when you want to visit, how often you want to visit. The only rule we really have around this is that teams cannot visit for more than 2 hours a day. But most of our teams visit once a week or a few times a month. That's pretty typical, usually for 1 to 2 hours at a time. And the only thing to keep in mind is that before and after a visit, there is some kind of setup and breakdown, if you will, right? Where you have to get your animal ready to go, make sure they're clean, and also they need some decompression time on the back end. In terms of where you visit, we do have a volunteer opportunities directory, which even prospective volunteers can access so that you can kind of get a sense of where people are looking for teams or in what types of facilities. You access that by starting a volunteer center account, and maybe somebody can drop in the comments the link to starting a volunteer center account. Once you're logged in, on your homepage, if you scroll down just a little bit, it will have a box that says, there are X number of opportunities in your area. It depends on the area, how many there are. You click on that box, and then you get a listing of all of the facilities looking for Pet Partners teams. And then you are able to reach right out to them, say, I saw you on the Pet Partners website. I'd love to volunteer with my horse or my cat, my dog, and get it set up. But you are not limited only to facilities that are listed in our directory. Like I said, volunteers are empowered to visit where they want. So we have a lot of volunteers who are wanting to visit at the school where their child attends, or they want to volunteer at the nursing care facility where their parent is, or maybe they themselves had been at a rehab center and had received a visit from a therapy animal team Now they're a team themselves and they want to pay it forward. You can reach out to the facilities and say, hey, I'm now a registered team. I've been evaluated. I'm insured. Can I come visit at your facility? In a lot of cases, facilities are more than happy to have you come in. And if they're not as well kind of versed in therapy animal volunteerism and they need a little bit of help understanding what that looks like if you want to volunteer there, we can help them. We also have information that we've written directly for facilities who are getting ready to invite teams in for the first time or getting ready to grow their program. So don't be shy. There's lots of different places you can approach about visiting. I'm going to stop and check the comments, but we are going to move to the next slide too. Oh, great. Tina, really neat. So Tina's a great example. She's registered with a mini horse, but she's also going to register with a dog in the near future, which is great. We do have some handlers like that. We call them multi-species handlers, where they can work across different types of species. I see a couple of people here who have young animals, so I'm going to touch on that a little bit because I'm sure you have questions about training and preparation, so we will talk about that. All right, so before we even talk about what makes a therapy animal successful or what makes a therapy handler successful, I want to talk about basic eligibility requirements, things you kind of have to have in order before you can really get very deep in the process. So first thing is animal age. So pocket pets, that means our rabbits, guinea pigs, rats, they have to be at least 6 months old. All other species have to be at least 1 year old. Now that means 1 year old at the time of evaluation, because once you complete the evaluation, you can pretty immediately register within a week or two after that. Registration just means you've completed all the process and now you have your badge in hand, your letter stating that you're a registered team. So they have to be a year before they can complete the process. But if you as the handler wants to get the process started earlier, you certainly can do that. And in fact, we would recommend that so that you are kind of up to speed on what you need to do to get your young animal sort of ready to go. Additionally, your animal needs to have lived with you for at least 6 months. The exception is birds. That's 1 year. I don't think we have any bird people on here, but I will mention that they have a little bit of a different requirement. For all their species, they need to have lived with you for 6 months. So that means you might have adopted a cat. The cat is 3 years old, but it isn't eligible to participate until you've lived with it so that you understand its temperament, what it likes, what it dislikes, all that good stuff. All animals must be potty trained. No waste collection devices are allowed. The only exception is one thing for birds. Again, I don't think we have birds here, so I won't dive into that, but all of them must be potty trained. We also don't allow animals who eat a raw protein diet. That is for infection prevention and control reasons. So that's not allowed. So make sure that you're feeding your animal appropriately if they are gonna be a therapy animal. In terms of general animal health, we want them to be in good health. There are certain medications that disqualify them from the program, specifically antifungal medications, immunosuppressives. I always tell people if your animal is on like a long course of treatment for an illness, before you go through any other steps, reach out, talk to us about that medication, what your animal situation is, just so we can determine eligibility at the outset. But I do also want to mention that we do have animals who have less than perfect health, right? They might have a disability, or they might have a very easily controlled disease that is treated with a medication that is not disqualifying. So we want to be as inclusive as possible, and we will be. There are just certain things we can't allow. So always reach out to us. And then one other thing on this medication issue, we know that animals are sometimes on immunosuppressives or antifungals for short periods of time. That's okay. You just can't visit when the animal is on those types of medications, but it doesn't disqualify them from being registered in general. And then, of course, obedience skills are really important. We'll talk about that more in the next slide, but before you really get too far in the process in terms of worrying about getting an evaluation and all of that. You're going to want to make sure your obedience skills for your species are pretty solid. They don't need to be perfect. We're not looking for obedience trial winners, but we are looking for some really solid obedience skills. So let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about what makes a therapy animal successful. So obviously therapy animals need to be people-oriented, sociable, and friendly, but I always like to remind people that this means with strangers and in strange environments. So what I see a lot, just in general life, not in pet partners, is there are animals who are very friendly with their owners and people they know, and then they kind of tolerate interactions with strangers. But what we're looking for are animals who enjoy interactions with strangers. Also, they need to also be people-oriented, sociable, and friendly when they're in an unfamiliar environment. I know I can say about my dog, who is not a registered therapy animal, she is super people-oriented when she's someplace she knows. When she gets in an unfamiliar environment, she's very distracted. So if I ever wanted to have her register with me as a therapy animal team, we'd have to work on keeping her people-oriented, even when there's lots of distractions, even when there's new sights and smells or things that feel strange. Of course, obedience skills are necessary. That is part of making sure that therapy animal visits stay kind of safe and controlled, is to ensure that your animal will follow the commands that you ask of it and stay under control. We're also looking for animals that remain calm and are comfortable by being touched by others. I've already talked about the stranger aspect, but the remain calm is really important. We do have young animals participate. They absolutely do have more energy than our older animals in most cases. And that's okay. But even when excited, the animal needs to remain calm, meaning, jumping on people or any sort of excessive vocalization that's sort of coming from being amped up. So making sure that that calm temperament is there. And that can be something, especially with those of you with young animals, that can be obviously trained over time through kind of repeated exposure and socialization, is once an animal has seen things over and over and over again, they're able to remain more calm with that repeated exposure. And then, of course, therapy animals cannot be aggressive towards people, but they also can't be aggressive towards other animals. And this is because on a therapy animal visit, say you're in an airport or a school or in a university campus, you're definitely going to run into service animals now and again. You'll certainly run into personal pets in some of those situations. I know college campuses now are allowing at least emotional support animals to live in their buildings. And then, of course, with the growing popularity of therapy animals, you may see other therapy animals when you're visiting, whether you expected them to be there or not. So with that said, let's talk next about what makes a successful therapy animal handler. Yes, so we're going to talk about the human end of the leash here. I'm just going to scroll through comments real quick. I apologize. You can read that while I'm looking. All right. Great. Okay, there's a few things I'll address at the end. Successful handlers are also friendly and personable, again, comfortable and polite with strangers. We're also looking for handlers who can kind of predict and redirect their animal's behavior. We call this proactive handling, because any therapy animal, even our most experienced, will have some amount of stress at certain points in their visiting journey. They aren't going to love every single thing or every person they encounter. So we're looking for handlers who can sort of understand, oh, I know Fluffy isn't going to love this. How can I redirect her behavior or redirect what I'm doing so that she doesn't even exhibit the behavior? So proactive handling is something we look for. This is part of the evaluation as well, which we'll talk about a little bit later. We're also looking for handlers who have their number one priority as their animal, meaning they are more important for you to pay attention to than anybody you're visiting. Your priority is not with the patient, the client, or the student. Your priority is with your animal. It doesn't mean that people don't matter. It just means to keep visits as safe as possible, we need the handler always connected with their animal and willing to advocate for that animal. We call that yayaba, or you are your animal's best advocate. So if your animal is experiencing something that you know they probably don't like, getting in there and advocating for them, saying, hey, could we maybe pet Fluffy on the ears instead of on her back, or whatever it might be that your animal prefers. So proactive handling, advocating for your animal. And then of course, all handlers must follow Pet Partners policies and procedures, which is something that you learn via our course and our manual, which I will also talk about. So let's move on from this. Okay, I am seeing some question about horses in here. So I just want to pause really quickly and talk about that. So if you start a volunteer center account with us, I think the link was shared with how you can do that. On the home page, there's a big brown box that says resources. Most of those are available to prospective handlers. So even if you're not registered, you can peek in there. If you type in horse or type in evaluation, if what you're wondering about is sort of what does the evaluation process look like for them, what do they need, you should be able to get that information by typing in horse or evaluation. We won't go into specific species today, but again, trust that we want to make sure our non-canine handlers are as prepared and understand the program as well as anybody else. So up on your screen are some of the steps that are related to becoming a therapy animal team. These are not all of the steps, but they are the steps that sort of take the most time. So I just wanted to provide an overview. The only two I'm going to talk about now are steps 2 and 4. So training and evaluation. So let's take a look at training first. Thank you. So at Pet Partners, we require a handler's training, which can be done in one of two formats. It can be done online, or it can be done in an in-person workshop that's led by an instructor. Both lead to the same outcomes, meaning roughly the same number of people from each group pass their evaluation and become a team. So you should really choose the format that works best for you, and not necessarily worry about if one is better than the other. They both have pros and cons. Obviously, the online course can be done on your own schedule. You can come to it, leave, go back to it, kind of visit and revisit it. You may not have an instructor in your area, or maybe you do have an instructor in your area, but they aren't offering workshops at times that work for you. On the workshop side of things, you have a live instructor in front of you as well as other handlers in the room or prospective handlers. So you have that opportunity to kind of learn together. Then you also have a live person in front of you and you can ask questions. So like I said, pros and cons to both. The handler training focuses on both the handler and the animal in that we cover information related to the animal. However, it is not an animal training course, meaning you don't bring your animal to the in-person workshop. It is for humans only. Once you go through our handler training, whichever format, you will have a good sense of what you need to do to work with your animal to train them further in order to successfully pass the evaluation and become a successful team. What this means is that some handlers might realize, wow, okay, I've got a 10-month-old dog. He needs to continue to be working on obedience skills. We also need to do maybe further visits out in public. Maybe we go to the Home Depot, which are often dog-friendly, or the local hardware store. Maybe we have some meals on a dog-friendly patio because, again, more socialization and introduction to distractions are important for my animal. So some people might decide, I need some formal training, but I also need to do some in-home training. And we really trust our handlers once they've taken the course or while they're taking the course to make those decisions that are best for their animal. There might be another handler who has an older animal who has maybe a really calm temperament. And to be clear, I know young animals can be as well. This is just an example. And maybe they already have done obedience work a number of years ago, and the animal has already been really well socialized, and they feel pretty ready to evaluate after kind of touching up on a few skills. That's okay too. We don't want to require animal training that doesn't work for all teams. It's a barrier. Also, remember, for a lot of our non-canine owners, any specific training done with a professional is probably not available to them. Not a lot of guinea pig trainers or rat trainers out there. So we want to make sure that we're accessible to all. So our training really focuses on the human end of the leash. We're going to talk about the evaluation next. So the evaluation process is required of all new teams. Also, if you're an existing team, we require evaluation every 2 years to sort of make sure that the team is still continually well prepared and well suited for this volunteer effort. But for new teams, obviously it's required before you can even begin visiting. The evaluation is about 35 to 45 minutes in length. It is conducted by a licensed Pet Partners evaluator. We have about 500 licensed evaluators worldwide. The majority are in the US. And the evaluators move through 20 plus exercises, and they score you on each. And to be clear, they score both you as the handler and the animal. So each exercise's score is kind of 50% the responsibility of the human and 50% the responsibility of the animal. So often in therapy, animal volunteerism, people want to focus on the animal. What is the animal doing to pass the evaluation? And I can say that sometimes handlers make that mistake. They show up to the evaluation and they think, well, I'll just kind of step back and let the evaluator do their thing. But actually, the human's involvement in the entire process results in 50% of the score. So 20 plus exercises, about half of them are more obedience-based, and those are species-specific. So they aren't going to look the same for a dog as they do for a rabbit, for example. And then the other half are what we call aptitude-based. So this is where we start introducing more situations that a team may see on a therapy animal visit, because we want our evaluation as much as possible to simulate that therapy animal visit experience. So I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but I'll give you a few examples. There is an exercise where somebody will approach you and your animal with a piece of medical equipment, perhaps using a walker, using a wheelchair. There is an exercise where loud noise is created, and we're watching to see how the team reacts to that. On that particular exercise, I will tell you, we're not looking for animals who don't respond to like a loud noise. It's okay if an animal even startles at a loud noise. That would be normal. What we're looking for is, how does the animal recover, and how does the handler support them? Petting, reassuring voice, things like that, so that after they experience that little tiny bit of stress, they can kind of calm down again. Other exercises include something we call crowded petting, where multiple people will come and try to pet your animal at the same time. This is because when you're on a therapy animal visit, especially someplace like a school or an airport where things can be busy, your animal might be the highlight of the day. And as soon as somebody sees that animal, they want to pet it. So we want to see, how does your animal handle more than one person at a time? There is an exercise where the evaluator will pet your animal in a clumsy way, meaning not in a way your animal might be used to. And again, this is just evaluating, how does your animal handle interactions that it may not be as accustomed to. So those are some samples of evaluation exercises. Once the evaluation is completed, if you pass, you then can complete the registration process online. I just have one more slide to share for you, and then I'm going to loop back to comments and answer questions. I just wanted to share in closing some of the benefits of registration with Pet Partners. The one that most people care about immediately, of course, is that if you're registered with us, you do have a liability insurance kind of backing you up, and a lot of facilities are going to require that. But I also like to point out too that probably the best benefit, and maybe some of our existing handlers can chime in on this, is that Pet Partners is really committed to continuing education and resources for our handlers. So we don't just evaluate you, register you, and then send you off on your own. We want to make sure that if this is something you're passionate about and it's something your animal loves, that we are continuing to give you resources to make you a better team, and also to address certain areas that might be of interest to you. So we have courses like visiting patients with Alzheimer's, or providing therapy animal visitation to veterans, if that's what you're interested in doing. So that's a big benefit of registration. A lot of our resources and courses are free to existing handlers or existing teams, and then others for registered volunteers are a reduced rate. So that's all I have to share right now. So I'm going to go back to comments. Please feel free to ask questions. So I see there's a question about registration fees. It's actually a little bit different for new teams than renewing teams. It's also a little bit different if you are of a certain age, or if you have military status. So I'm actually going to ask, oh, good, they just put it up there. One of my colleagues just shared the registration fee page. There's also a cost for the coursework in some cases, but the fees will kind of take you through everything associated with that. I know sometimes there's some concern about, well, why am I paying to volunteer? And I understand that sometimes feels different than other volunteer experiences. But for Pet Partners, it actually costs more for us to kind of do some of the things we do than the registration fees can cover. I mean, insurance, all the education, the staff time. And we actually have a lot of wonderful donors and corporate partners, sponsors, who help sort of make up that difference. So we do try to keep fees as low as we possibly can. I'm taking a peek at some other things that are coming through. It looks like most things have been answered by my wonderful colleagues in the comments. Oh, I see one that just came through about whether or not our handlers are able to volunteer at VA hospitals. Yes, absolutely. We do have teams that visit at VAs all over the country. I know where I am, which is Minneapolis. It's a very popular volunteer opportunity for our teams. So that's definitely possible. Any other questions while I hang out for the next 30 seconds or so? Otherwise, like I said, I think most were handled via comments. Which is great. So my email address is up there. We also, at the bottom of every single web page on our site, there's a Contact Us button. And you can click that, submit any question you have about this live, or if I covered something that you didn't quite understand, reach out, let us know. We are here to help. And we so appreciate you taking the time to come and learn about Pet Partners. I hope that I was helpful to each and every one of you in some way. So